Hi, everyone. My name is Suhaila Sekhans, and I'm a facilitator of the California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee. We are very excited to host this conversation today to dig into the California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee, also known as CAEECC, CAEECC, and dig into who CAEECC is, what CAEECC does, and how CAEECC works. So, with that, I will dive in. The California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee, is a stakeholder collaborative which really focuses on the market rate energy efficiency within the California Public Utilities Commission. So this collaborative really provides a venue to openly discuss matters raised by the California Public Utility Commission, that's the CPUC, if you ever see that acronym, as well as by CAEECC members themselves. And this is through a more transparent process. So CAEECC provides recommendations that can influence or impact energy efficiency policy decisions for the market rate energy efficiency programming. And that policy decisions and programming is really geared towards the California Public Utility Commission. Members of CAEECC include advocates, implementers, government staff, and program administrators. This is as of, what date is it? the July 6th, 2023. And just a little call out, CAEECC does not focus on income qualified energy efficiency directly. So today in this conversation, we're going to go through a little bit of background about what is energy efficiency, kind of ground ourselves in this space. We'll look into CAEECC itself and how it fits into this energy efficiency regulatory proceeding, and then dive into a little bit about specifically about the Evolving CAEECC Working Group, and then have a little conversation about justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Before we really dive in, I want to ground ourselves in some common terms that are used widely throughout CAEECC as well as the regulatory industry as well within the energy efficiency space. And so, as I mentioned in my introduction, CAEECC, which is the California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee, is a stakeholder collaborative that focuses on market rate energy efficiency under the California Public Utilities Commission. We'll get a little understanding of them in a slide or two. So at the CPUC, the California Public Utility Commission, they are governed by 5 governor-appointed commissioners, and those are individuals that are really guiding the commission itself. And then another term, these are all in alphabetical order, is the Community Choice Aggregator, CCA. These are local entities, either like through a city or a county, or maybe a region that really like purchases or can generate electricity for their community. And so they are like a utility, but not an investor-owned utility. That's what the IOU on this slide is, which we'll break down in just a little bit. In the sense that they will produce energy and electricity specifically for their customers. However, the investor-owned utilities will continue to provide the transmission, distribution, and gas services. So, as I mentioned, the CPUC is the California Public Utilities Commission. They are tasked with regulating privately owned electric, natural gas, telecommunications, water, railroad, rail transit, and passenger transportation companies, as well as authorizing video franchises. So that is their official charge. Related to CAEECC, we'll be mostly talking about electricity, as well as some natural gas. I also mentioned IOU. This is the investor-owned utility. These are private monopoly utilities that generate and or distribute power to customers within the defined service territory. Examples of IOUs in California include Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, SDG&E, San Diego Gas and Electric, SoCal Gas, as well as others. A proceeding, which will be talked about very shortly in depth, is an administrative law process, which is very much a mouthful, that forms on the basis of decisions that are made at the Public Utility Commission. So this could be approving or denying rate increases that relate to the rates that customers see on their bills, as well as creating like energy savings programs, or setting rules and guidelines for those, as well as introducing new safety rules. Program administrators are also pretty key in the conversation around energy efficiency programs. So these are entities that design and implement, and/or they can also administer third-party run energy efficiency programs. So that means that they're the folks that are really kind of not necessarily implementing, but administering these programs. So PA, that's the acronym that we refer to them with. They can be housed at IOUs, at regional energy networks, as well as at CCAs. And the CPUC, they manage the CPUC approved energy efficiency programs that use ratepayer funding. So it's a very specific subset of energy efficiency programs that may exist. And we'll get into that a little bit as well. So program implementer is someone who implements the programs that we just discussed. And so historically, the IOUs, the investor-owned utilities, ran and implemented the majority of energy efficiency programs. So this has mostly shifted to increase competition within the solicitation process. But this has shifted. So in 2022, it's now required that at least 60% of energy efficiency programs are implemented by third parties. So those are people those are not the IOUs. A few other common terms: market transformation. So this is a strategic process of intervening within the market to really alter the way that companies make and sell equipment, to be more efficient in the way that people might interact with said equipment or services, or really buy them. So market transformation programs target and remove barriers that are identified barriers. So these can include new efficient equipment costs, and the amount that those equipments are available for. That equipment really isn't available everywhere, and so you might have this sort of energy efficiency equipment desert in a particular region. And then the workforce that is trained to install it might not be as prevalent in certain communities, or at all. And then a public-owned utility is a not-for-profit public agency that supports and/or delivers electricity within their defined service territory. So this can include city municipal departments, such as the Pasadena Department of Water and Power. There's the Sacramento Municipal Utility District as well. And then POUs are not regulated by the CPUC, as they're not private. And there's currently no POUs sitting on CAEECC membership. Other common terms include the ratepayer. So this is the residential, commercial, agricultural, or industrial customer who is paying for services from their electric or gas providers. And then the regional energy network, I did mention this a few slides back. They are local government entities that can administer and implement energy efficiency programs to complement IOU programs. So RENs typically focus on hard to reach or disadvantaged communities and fill regional gap needs. I do want to pause, as I did just say disadvantaged communities. There is a conversation within the Evolving CAEECC working group, as well as kind of extending beyond that, to revisit this term of disadvantaged. And the proposal is to use community of concern instead. Disadvantaged communities currently is a coined term at the CPUC, which has its own definition that is included within the CPUC Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan. I don't have the definition on hand right now, but I do want to call that anytime there is a disadvantaged community reference within this deck, I will also be acknowledging that it is a community of concern as well. And then the last term potentially that we have is the working groups. And so there's small groups within CAEECC that focus on specific issues that need exploration or like to write memos for recommendations. And this is for consideration. Working group final deliverables are for consideration at full CAEECC. And potentially to PAs as well as the CPUC as needed. All right, we got through our key terms. That was a lot of key terms. And I will try my best to continue to break those terms down or break down any acronym that we might see in this deck. So we want to dive into energy efficiency and what in this deck and in much of the industry is referred to as EE. And so energy efficiency is the use of less electricity or gas to perform the same task or produce the same result as it would otherwise. And so energy efficiency buildings, whether they're homes or businesses, use less energy to heat, cool, and run appliances and electronics. And energy efficient manufacturing facilities use less energy to produce goods. So this is important because energy efficiency can save consumers money. You're not paying as much, or you're not using as much energy to, let's say, turn on the lights or to heat my home, which then means that we're saving money on our utility bills. It can also reduce greenhouse gases through environmental benefits, especially if it's using like renewable energy within your utility. And then energy efficiency can also help create jobs and improve health. And health can be improved through reducing harmful emissions, as well as improving indoor air quality. And then it also helps reduce strain on the electricity grid. And that means that it also improves the reliability of the electricity grid. I'm not going to get into grid reliability right now. That is provided in the appendix of this deck if you would like to learn more. So just a little call out that California was one of the first states in the country to adopt EE programs and policies, and it's consistently marked as one of the most progressive states for said policies. With between the 40-ish years, between 1970 and 2013, California's programs on energy efficiency avoided what has been calculated as the need for at least 30 power plants, and has saved residents more than $65 billion. This is sourced from NRDC. So we're talking about energy efficiency, and we're talking about, okay, there's these programs that are created to help a customer reduce the amount of energy that they're using to perform a specific task. Well, that means that these programs are probably funded. And so EE in California is funded directly from ratepayers through their bills. And that is similar to how other energy costs are paid for. So you might see on your utility bill a little line item that says, for example, the public purpose surcharge. So there's a few other terms that get confused with one another. And so we want to take a second to just break these three terms down. So there's energy efficiency, there's energy conservation, and then there's renewable energy. So energy efficiency and conservation, they're not exactly the same thing, but they do have a similar goal, and that is to reduce energy use. So energy conservation typically relies on people's behavior. So that is, for example, me choosing not to run my AC in the summer. I don't have AC, by the way, but not to run the AC in the summer and instead use what's called passive heating and cooling. So opening my windows in the morning and allowing an air shift to happen to cool my home down. Whereas energy efficiency, we use technology to then reduce the amount of energy that it takes. So that means getting an AC unit that requires less energy to actually perform its task of running AC. So renewable energy is similar to energy efficiency, that it shares the goal of expanding the clean energy economy. So renewable energy is energy that is derived from like natural resources, and so those are replenished at a higher rate. So if we take something like coal takes hundreds, if not thousands, of years to kind of form into what is known as coal, whereas something like wind is replenished just through weather patterns. So renewable energy sources, like I just mentioned, might include something like wind, solar, hydroelectric. Renewables produce energy and are often referred to within the energy regulatory space as generation or supply side energy. On the other hand, energy efficiency is referred to as quote unquote demand side or customer side energy because it relates not to how energy is made, but it relates to how energy is used. So as I mentioned, there's energy efficiency programs. And these are, there's a lot of different types of energy efficiency programs, including some that are funded through government agencies, some that are privately funded, and some that are funded through nonprofits. CAEECC as a whole focuses on market rate energy efficiency programs that have been approved by the CPUC. What that means is that CAEECC focuses on programs that anyone can participate in regardless of income level, that are using funding from customer utility bills. I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, which is that sometimes on utility bills, you'll see like a line item that says specific charges or specific like additional things. And those are a small fraction percentage of those is what helps fund energy efficiency programs. So the CPUC approved programs are run by certain investor-owned utilities, IOUs, by regional energy networks, RENs, and by community choice aggregators, CCAs. So in addition to the baseline, some RENs and CCAs offer other energy efficiency programs that are funded through a different mechanism. So that's like without ratepayer funds. Those programs aren't under CAEECC's purview or under CAEECC's scope because CAEECC only focuses on the ones that on the programs that the CPUC oversees and approves because they're ratepayer funded. So examples of these programs can include weatherization, so insulation of buildings to better retain heat and cooling, rebates or incentives for consumers, contractors, manufacturers, retailers. So that can be in the form of a discount, a form, a whole building upgrade, or like a very specific custom engineering incentive. Appliances, I did skip that for a reason. So traditional programs have involved like the replacement of certain appliances like dishwashers, laundry machines, light bulbs. Many programs today, however, focus on using like smart thermostats to help someone manage their behavior, like their energy usage, just through the additional kind of analysis provided through smart technology, through electric heat pump and water heaters, as well as through room air conditioners. So this last part is really where energy efficiency programs today tend to focus. And then energy efficiency programs have a few different characteristics. So there's how many sectors energy efficiency programs can reach. So sectors can mean like residential, single family or multifamily housing. It can mean commercial buildings that are whether they're small, medium, large, maybe they're nonprofits, agricultural or industrial. And so energy efficiency programs can focus in these 4 different areas. And then there's this characteristic of like non-energy elements. So programs can also provide support, for example, for workforce development or training. They can provide education and outreach initiatives. They can work on codes and standards. They can support energy efficiency as well as the industry. As I mentioned, energy efficiency programs that CAEECC that CAEECC oversees and works on within their scope. Sorry, CAEECC does not oversee it. Energy efficiency programs that CAEECC works on and advises are programs that are governed and overseen by the California Public Utility Commission. So they govern energy efficiency programs as well as their finances through regulatory avenues called proceedings. And I did mention proceedings in the common terms, kind of like definitions area. So CAEECC's scope is to focus on this market rate energy efficiency proceeding. This is this number R period 13-11-005. That is what's called the proceeding number. So CAEECC, in addition to focusing on this proceeding, takes into account other relevant proceedings. That includes the Energy Savings Assistance Program, where the number is out here, to ensure that like there's coordination and alignment where necessary. But CAEECC does not influence said proceedings. CAEECC's role is only advisory. CAEECC advises program administrators and sometimes through their recommendations advises how the CPUC can direct program administrators. CAEECC provides a unique opportunity to be in a facilitated dialogue with CPUC staff, program administrators, third-party implementers, environmental and customer advocates, as well as other impacted stakeholders regarding the design, implementation, and evaluation of energy efficiency programs, as well as to improve any related policies around that. So I just mentioned this. CAEECC has this role, this unique role, to help guide the design, implementation, and evaluation. These are a few of the elements within energy efficiency program. So portfolio or an energy efficiency portfolio is a string of programs that are related or maybe under the purview of one specific entity. So for program design, PAs develop what's called business plans. These are high-level overviews outlining how a PA will meet state and regional goals for energy efficiency. As a little side note, in 2021, the CPUC amended the process for business plan and improving business plans from being filed every 10 years to being filed every 4 years. So we're on a much more like a smaller cadence to review and go through business plans. Implementation. So PAs design and develop implementation plans that detail the specifics, basically kind of like a manual, to identify how programs will be designed and run in compliance to their approved business plan. So again, like a business plan is now approved every 4 years, and then a PA will develop an implementation plan to detail out exactly how this program or set of programs will be designed to run in compliance. And then there's this other piece, it's a little bit big. It's called evaluation, measurement, and verification. It's called EM and V. So these are assessments of performance and the impacts of energy efficiency programs. There are key indicators that can be different for each program, and it includes energy savings, emissions reductions, participation rates, and cost effectiveness. Evaluation is used to determine success and identify challenges and to improve future programming. As a caveat, EM and V is conducted by third parties and overseen by the CPUC, not by PAs. This is to avoid conflicts of interest. So again, we're using ratepayer funds to create these programs that are approved by the CPUC. So in order to kind of use these ratepayer funds and to unlock them, programs need to be evaluated, measured, and verified. This means that there needs to be some sort of data, some sort of acknowledgement and understanding of the program's success in order to properly and efficiently use ratepayer funding. So there's a few additional specifics. There is a potentials and goals study. And this is third-party companies who run a computer model to identify various energy savings opportunities within each PA's territories. The CPUC then uses these estimates to set goals for energy efficiency. These goals then inform how PAs design their business plans and their energy efficiency program proposals. Energy efficiency programs are guided again by the CPUC policy that sets overarching goals, objectives, and requirements. So then there's also this other piece of cost effectiveness. This is to make sure that any investment in energy efficiency is a prudent use of ratepayer funding. I just mentioned this on the other slide, that because it's using ratepayer funds, there needs to be a good use of funding, that we're not just wasting people's money. And so the PAs and the CPUC run what's called cost effectiveness tests and analysis that identifies what's the benefit versus what's the cost of a program or a set of programs. So PAs are required to have this cost effectiveness portfolio for their programs. Some programs will be very, very highly effective, whereas others may not be as cost effective on their own. So the intention is to allow highly cost effective, tried and true programs to balance out those that are less effective, but to have innovative programs to really advance deeper energy savings. And then there's this last piece that's called solicitations. PAs frequently conduct open calls for third-party contractors to design and/or implement energy efficiency programs. I mentioned this way long ago, towards the beginning of this presentation, that at least 60% of all IOU-funded energy efficiency programs must be implemented by third parties through competitive solicitations. So this is basically a process that is presented at full quarterly CAEECC meetings and contains phases. So a solicitation process has a request for information, a request for proposals phase, selection of proposal, contracting, and negotiation. The solicitations are only for program design and implementation, and they're not for evaluation, measurement, and verification. The CPUC's intent for increasing the percentage of third-party programs was to really spur innovation and competition in the marketplace. So that's why there's a 60% minimum of third-party implementation. And there's this last piece of segments. And so in 2021, the CPUC divided programs into different buckets, or what's called segments. So the purpose was to cultivate programs that save energy, like resource acquisition, to help build the market to support other programs like market support, and to reach customers that may not have enough money to participate in that resource category. So this is like middle income customers, and that is the equity segment. So I want to dive into each segment. So the market support segment supports the long-term success of the energy efficiency market by educating customers, training contractors, building partnerships, or moving beneficial technologies towards greater cost effectiveness. So this segment is to promote the growth and development of energy efficiency products, services, and markets. It includes funding for market research, market transformation initiatives, as well as market development programs. Equity, the segment provides energy efficiency to hard to reach or underserved customers and disadvantaged communities of concern, in advancement of the Commission's Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan. By prioritizing energy efficiency needs in the underserved communities, programs can promote equitable access to energy savings opportunities. So this segment is different than the Energy Savings Assistance Program, ESAP. That program, ESAP, provides no cost or direct install energy efficiency upgrades to income qualified customers. This is not what is captured within this segment. This equity segment instead aims to reach those that are ineligible for income qualified programs, but cannot yet afford to participate in energy savings programs. Resource acquisition, RA, is a short-term ability to deliver cost-effectiveness benefits to the electricity and natural gas systems. This segment includes funding for programs that directly result in energy savings, like upgrading lighting, HVAC, and appliances. There is one more segment. This is the codes and standards segment. It's the cheapest way to save energy is to influence the codes and standards policy at the California Energy Commission and the Department of Energy. These programs help to, quote unquote, ready the market for more advanced equipment. This includes research and testing for new products, assessment of cost effectiveness, and means to improve compliance. So, why are segments important? Only the resource acquisition programs are evaluated by traditional cost effectiveness tests. They must have at least a 1-to-1 ratio of benefits to cost. Until 2021, segments were resource and non-resource. This left many programs administrators feeling constrained by strict cost effectiveness rules that didn't recognize the value of benefits like education, training, air quality, non-energy benefits, or the value of improving quality of life and savings generally. So the resource programs were designed to reduce energy savings, like avoided energy consumption, which meant that if a program offered benefits like education to customers, it would lower their cost effectiveness because there is now this new cost that's added into the program that doesn't have any measurable energy savings. Let's say we have this new dishwasher program that switches out a dishwasher for a high efficiency dishwasher. And this program decides to pay for workforce training to help installers understand the new installation process for these high efficiency dishwashers. That training is an additional cost to the program itself. However, the benefit from the program in terms of reduction of kilowatt hours that the dishwasher, that the new dishwasher has is the same regardless if there's an additional cost for workforce training. Therefore, by adding workforce training into the program, you're increasing the cost of the program, but you're not increasing the benefit in terms of specific energy savings benefits. Therefore, that the cost effectiveness ratio under the old standard of cost effectiveness ratios with the old resource programs is lower and therefore less cost effective. That is why in 2021 the CPUC changed this, and so they added this market support as well as equity segment, and they have a budget cap of up to 30%. For program administrators to have more flexibility in how they offer programs that supports both equity and market support. So now program administrators have these two other segments that they can use, and they can use up to 30% of their budget to do that. There is a caveat here that regional energy networks don't have a 30% budget for equity and market support, since they are intended to focus more on these segments. As I mentioned a little earlier, there is a difference between market rate equity as well as low income energy efficiency programs. And what this means is that there is this program called the Energy Savings Assistance Program. It's called ESAP. This is an income qualified, no cost to customer energy efficiency upgrade program. Its eligibility is determined through different state assistance programs, like the California Alternate Rates for Energy Program, CARE. The equity segment for market rate energy efficiency programs are a lot broader than ESAP. So they can target, these equity segment can target low income customers only for things that aren't covered by the energy savings assistance programs. The primary goal is to increase access to programs among segments of the population that have been historically unaware or have not participated in these programs for various reasons, such as lack of upfront capital and/or language barriers. CAEECC's interaction with the equity program is specific to the market rate equity segment of program offerings. Deep breath. That was a lot. We got through what is energy efficiency. Now it's who's involved in energy efficiency. So there's three main agencies involved in energy efficiency at the state. This is the CPUC, the California Public Utilities Commission, the CEC, the California Energy Commission, and CARB, the California Air Resources Board. So as I mentioned, the CPUC oversees funds that are being used appropriately. In addition, they set goals for energy efficiency through the potentials and goals study. We talked about that a little bit, and directs the PAs to design programs that motivate customers to take energy efficiency actions that otherwise wouldn't have happened. The CPUC has several divisions, including the Energy Division. This advises the commissioners and administrative law judges that develop policy proposals through decisions and rulings. They also oversee energy policy and programs that were approved by the full commission to ensure compliance with the commission decisions and statutory mandates. In relation to CAEECC's efforts, the CEC adopts energy efficiency standards for appliances and buildings. They also identify the energy needs of the state, as well as how much energy efficiency and renewables can meet that need, called a demand forecast. This forecast is what IOUs and CCAs need to plan for in their program development. CARB, the California Air Resources Board, in relation to CAEECC, supports energy efficiency as it reduces energy-related emissions and insufficient air quality. CARB's scoping plan includes energy efficiency programs as one strategy for the state to reach emission reduction goals. All right, well, thank you for sitting through the introduction to energy efficiency and the context around energy efficiency, so that way we can place and situate the California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee. This is our next section. So CAEECC, the California Energy Efficiency Coordinating Committee, is a venue to do four things: improve collaboration, seek resolution, vet ideas, and find ways to make processes more efficient. So to do that, CAEECC coordinates activities important to implementing energy efficiency. They identify and aim for resolution and to propose recommendations to the CPUC. They provide ongoing forum for stakeholders to bring ideas for consideration. that could be referred to the appropriate topic or subgroup. And they seek efficiencies in the process. So really kind of like how to like make review process more efficient, combining meetings, prioritizing issues, etc. So CAEECC does all those 4 things through the following. They support and expand EE programs. That means they expand high quality energy efficiency programs that reduce greenhouse gas emissions in line with state climate and energy goals while responding to customers' needs and market dynamics. They provide meaningful and useful input to the PAs in the development and implementation of energy efficiency business plans. They also, CAEECC also provides collaboration and communication among parties with the CPUC on energy efficiency matters. And they resolve disagreements, they talk it out among stakeholders whenever possible to reduce the number of matters that need to be litigated before the CPUC. Hashing it out, really talking things through to keep it away from that kind of very formal proceeding mechanism. So CAEECC was formed really, again, to provide a venue. So it was formed in 2013. There's this idea of parties at the CPUC and at the commission. And these are official stakeholders that have like really signed up through the regulatory proceeding. That's the definition of party. So in 2013, parties in the regulatory proceeding for energy efficiency really kind of realized that a new format was needed to effectively and productively have discussion, to hash out disagreements, and to produce joint recommendations. And so that is how CAEECC developed. So there's 3 kind of main ways that CAEECC convenes. This is through full CAEECC quarterly meetings. It's the primary space for CAEECC to convene as a member group. So it's quarterly, so it's 4 times a year. Meetings are generally 4 to 6 hours long. They're set about a year in advance. The facilitation team has included most recently 2 sections, a main assembly and then an optional assembly, where members are expected to join the main assembly that has pertinent information, and then they may join the optional assembly with relevant information. There's working groups. These are topic-specific series to dissect discuss, and make recommendations around a specific issue area. There's also workshops. These are like more one-off topic-specific events to dissect and discuss a given issue area. As a note, all meetings and meeting topics may be initiated either through CAEECC members or by CPUC direction. And what that means is, for example, the CPUC commissioner may put out a decision that says CAEECC is ordered to do X, Y, and Z. This is a very big slide. This is breaking down the current membership of CAEECC. And the CAEECC has a leadership team that is made basically of the facilitation team, 2 elected co-chairs, as well as ex officio. So the elected co-chairs are a non-PA as well as a PA. There's 4 advocate members, there's 5 implementer members, there's 5 government members, and there's 10 program administrators. As a note, program administrators are required to be CAEECC members. As I just said, program administrators are required to be CAEECC members. So they do currently have the highest representation on CAEECC. So there's a few different roles. I mentioned the co-chairs, they're elected. Then there's members, these are voting participants. And then there's ex officio. These are representatives from CPUC, CEC, and CARB that support CAEECC to align to programs and discuss improvements and really serve in an advisory capacity, but they do not have a vote in CAEECC, and they cannot direct CAEECC scopes or activities, but they can make recommendations for consideration. Then there's also members of the public. Meetings are open to the public unless otherwise specified, and documents are publicly accessible on the CAEECC's website. The one thing that isn't represented on the slide are working group members. So there's full CAEECC members, which is the members that's described here on this slide. And then there might be members of a specific working group. However, those working group members may not be full CAEECC members. So there's a little caveat there. Full working group members can include CAEECC members. They can include what's otherwise known as like interested stakeholders or members of the public. And those working groups are established through an application process. So members on full CAEECC are determined that anyone can apply to be a member during open membership calls. Just as a note, in 2023, CAEECC is no longer not taking any new members until the recommendations of the Evolving CAEECC Working Group has surfaced. And this is because I'll get into it a little bit later, but the Evolving CAEECC Working Group is really making recommendations to kind of rethink the purpose, the scope, objectives, and perhaps the structure of CAEECC. And so it was determined that, you know, adding new members to something that could be changed might be a little premature. And so new members are not being accepted currently as of July of 2023. But these are the eligibility criteria as they currently stand. Members must have a detailed understanding of and working familiarity with the energy efficiency policies and cost effectiveness framework. There's agreement to abide by all CAEECC roles and responsibilities and ground rules. And then again, this reminder that all CPUC approved PAs are required to be part of CAEECC. And then the leadership team. So the co-chairs are nominated, as I mentioned earlier. And there's one that's a PA co-chair and one that's a non-PA co-chair. And then the CPUC provides guidance on meeting strategy and scope. And so there's typically 1 to 2 representatives from Energy Division who participate in full CAEECC quarterly meetings, working groups, workshops, and then on planning team meetings as well in leadership. I also mentioned this, that working group members are selected based on their applications adherence to eligibility requirements. Some working group members may adopt a leadership roles, and this is really just dependent on the charge and the structure of the working group. Non-workshop attendees are invited to participate through the CAEECC listserv. So this is like a very large email list, and or through direct communication based on previous interests of CAEECC. So this is like a brief history of CAEECC and kind of what CAEECC has done like annually in the past. And so like in 2016, so CAEECC was developed in 2015. And then in 2016, they really sought to provide transparency on business plan proposals. In 2018, they had a few different working groups, one to remove barriers in the market for EE, one to make consistent third-party contract terms, and then one to think through normalized metered energy consumption. In 2019, there was unanimous working group proposal for amended filing processes in the EE proceedings, so kind of more like administrative, I guess. And then in 2020, a process to assess what quote unquote underserved means. As customers, underserved is a term that is widely used at the CPUC. And so a definition of that is what CAEECC sought in 2020. In 2021, they had working groups to define metrics and evaluations for segments. Again, that decision was made in 2021 where they added decisions. And so this is kind of like the the way to figure out how to measure those. In 2022, they developed a plan to increase accessibility and inclusivity in CAEECC. And then in 2023, right now, CAEECC is undergoing a working group called Developing CAEECC Working Group to develop recommendations for adapting changes in the EE portfolio, as well as to include justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion within CAEECC. So CAEECC is a stakeholder group, stakeholder collaborative, and there's two other stakeholder collaboratives that interact with the CPUC. That's LIOB, the Low Income Oversight Board, as well as DACAG, the Disadvantaged Communities Advisory Group. Note, DACAG is under a process to rename themselves, as disadvantaged is a derogatory term. And so LIOB is a legislative directed body, so they really work as a liaison between ratepayers and other stakeholders. They focus on low income related issues, just by their name, whereas CAEECC focuses on market rate energy efficiency. DACAG reviews CPUC and the CEC, the Energy Commission's clean energy programs and policies, to ensure that disadvantaged or communities or communities of concern benefit from those programs. So DACAG works through many proceedings, whereas CAEECC's scope only touches on disadvantaged communities or communities of concern as part of its broader scope related to market rate energy efficiency programs. All right, so we kind of went through a background of energy efficiency. We went through, what is CAEECC, giving some grounding to the work to the stakeholder group, and now we're going to talk about the Evolving CAEECC Working Group. So this group is taking on how to have CAEECC go through an evolution. So CAEECC is going on an evolution, and that's because CAEECC was created in 2015. It was created with assumptions that those who would want to engage with CAEECC would be well versed in extensive technical expertise in energy efficiency. It was also recognized that that the CPUC added this environmental and social justice action plan, and that CAEECC should be aligned to those principles and values that have been developed. There was a round 2 of that action plan that was released in April of 2022, maybe April 2021. And then CAEECC also recognizes that, there's no language or guidance about how CAEECC should be integrating and adopting justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion efforts within its purpose, scope, or structure. And so CAEECC recognizes that the current format of CAEECC is really probably hindering the goal of inclusion. So the CPUC ESJ Action Plan, the Environmental and Social Justice Action Plan, is a plan to help guide the CPUC decisions and make sure that broad regulatory authority continues to advance equity throughout the state. To fulfill its mission, the CPUC acknowledges it must focus on communities that have been underserved or communities of concern, and the plan outlines this. It's also recognized that through this plan, the CPUC can help become more transparent, accessible, and effective for all the communities it serves. So the action plan consists of 9 goals, the 1, 2, 3, 5 of which here are marked. So these are relevant to CAEECC in some capacity. So this includes consistently integrating equity and access considerations throughout the CPUC proceedings and other efforts. So the proceeding here would be the market rate energy efficiency proceeding, to increase investment in clean energy resources to benefit ESJ communities, especially to improve air quality and public health. We do that because energy efficiency is one of the benefits of energy efficiency is better indoor air quality, as well as reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Another goal to increase climate resilience in ESJ communities, to enhance outreach and public participation opportunities for ESJ communities to meaningfully participate in CPUC decision making and benefit from CPUC programs. So that is kind of CAEECC as in general is a great venue for public participation. And then to promote economic and workforce development opportunities in ESG communities, which CAEECC does and or is related to through the energy efficiency programs, which take this on. So the Evolving CAEECC Working Group is really a working group that will help develop and align CAEECC's purpose, objectives, structure, and processes as reflected in its governance policies with the CPUC and state goals around justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, as well as the evolving needs around the EE portfolio. So a little background about the intentions of the working group members, and this is based on the applications. And some things to kind of like highlight here is that most folks in the working group really want to make the system more equitable and promote the goals of equity, diversity, and inclusion within CAEECC. And some are very interested in also contributing to the leadership of energy efficiency through this advisory committee, which is CAEECC. So there's been questions about, the power that evolving CAEECC might have to actually make changes within CAEECC. And so this slide kind of outlines some of the different factors to that. And so the working group is expected to provide recommendations to amend the operating ground rules, scope, priorities, as well as processes within CAEECC as this group sees fit. This could have impacts on the representation of CAEECC or on CAEECC, power dynamics within CAEECC, as well as externally, as well as different processes that CAEECC undergoes. So the working group is planned to deliver a final report with these recommendations, and then that will go to the full CAEECC membership for a vote of adoption, excuse me. In some cases, CAEECC members will vote to adopt recommendations with modifications. So there is a possibility that when this does reach full CAEECC in its final deliverable, CAEECC might amend it prior to approving it. It's also anticipated that the recommendations will be submitted to the CPUC. Either, if full CAEECC doesn't come to consensus of whether or not they should adopt this, or if the recommendations are out of scope for CAEECC specifically. And then kind of generally, while it might not seem like fully direct to the community impacts, CAEECC is really more of like an influential forum for program design, policy, and other processes that then indirectly affects energy efficiency across communities and within homes. So commissioners at the CPUC have shown really great interest in the evolution of CAEECC, and in particular in making CAEECC an inclusive environment. And so this has come up quite a few times within commissioners kind of interacting with CAEECC as well. And so that gives us hope that, the CPUC will act on these recommendations, or at least take them very well into consideration. So CAEECC is also a stakeholder body with oversight from the CPUC. And so, as I mentioned, there is this kind of that not necessarily need, but CAEECC should align to the environmental and social justice action plan. And so this is one way that the CPUC can accomplish or work towards this goal of better participation within their proceedings. And then the Evolving CAEECC Working Group has representation from the CPUC through their energy division staff who are represented on the working group. And they're really there to help kind of guide the working group through an advisory role, and kind of really work through kind of what recommendations are feasible within scope. So typically evolving working groups at CAEECC are consensus based. And so that's how this working group will run. It's currently a question out for the working group if there's any like additional specifics that they'd like to add in for that. And then the working group will create a final report, as I mentioned, and that will ask for consensus recommendations and or like another way that this is approached is to ask folks to provide an alternative. And then the leadership team will support kind of needs of this working group throughout this process. And lastly, we want to go over, we talked a little bit about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion in terms of what that means or how CAEECC will kind of strive to adopt some of those principles through the evolving CAEECC working group. And so we want to break down on a very, very high level what JEDI or what justice, diversity, equity, and inclusion really is. So I'm going to present a set of graphics that's from the Giving Tree book. It's like a modification from that. And it describes the differences between inequality, equality, equity, and justice and in a very visual way. So as we can see, there's this tree that's leaning to the left. There's two people, one on the left, one on the right. And there's different instances where these two people can collect apples from this tree. And these instances are kind of what we're dissecting in these concepts of inequality, equality, equity, and justice. So inequality, you can see this picture. The person on the right doesn't get any apples because the tree's leaning away from them. And the density of the apples on the right is like way less than the density of apples on the left. And so in inequality, one entity is receiving more than another. And each time they receive more, the gap between them grows. So we can see this like sack of apples on the left by the left person that's accumulated because there hasn't been equal access over time. In equality, we see that both people are standing on this ladder. The ladder is the same height and the tree is still leaning towards the left. So that means that the person on the left can still access apples. They can now fully pick them versus letting them fall. But the density of apples is still distributed on the left side of the tree versus the right side of the tree. And we see that the right person still has no access to those apples. And there's less density, as we kind of mentioned. And kind of building on that, there's still this sack of apples, or 3 sacks of apples in this case, that are on the left side because there's still a gap that is existing because of like the historic lean of this tree that is basically distributing resources to one person more than another. So in equity, we see that now the ladders are different heights. So that way that the person on the left has the shorter ladder because they can now reach the apples. They have been able to reach them. And the person on the right has a higher ladder to be able to reach the tree because the tree is leaning towards the left. But as we can see, like both people can pick the ladders, but or can pick the apples, excuse me, but the apples are still more dense on the left side of the tree. And so the person on the right can pick an apple, but they can only really pick 3 maybe, versus like picking all the ones that are on the other side of the tree. And again, we see that there's a sack of apples from this historic inequity of being able to access all these apples throughout time and accumulating more apples for the left person versus the right person. And then in justice, we see that the tree is actually leaning straight now, or not leaning, it's upright. And that's because there's these, the system is adjusted to have these posts that are fixing the situation entirely. And so now the tree is going straight. There's distributed apples throughout the tree. So each person has equal opportunity to kind of get apples. And then the ladders are the same height because now the tree isn't moving. And you can see that the sack of apples has been redistributed so that everyone can access the historic lack of resources to one person. That's what justice is. It's kind of reworking the system and fixing the system, or working towards fixing the system to, and as well as acknowledging the historic inequities that have been present, to redistribute resources and wealth and benefits. Something that may not have been addressed in any of these graphics is abilities. These are two presumably able-bodied people that are able to climb a ladder, and those abilities are not, and that there's some that may not be able to access a ladder, and so a different solution may be needed in order to get to justice as well. So through this giving tree model, we can see that access to tools and even distribution alone might not properly account for the uneven aspects of the system generally. And so access to tools and even distribution don't also account for the historic inequality and inequity unless it's specifically addressed at the system level. So these concepts matter because structure, systems, and processes that exist in this world were created by humans to serve a purpose and defined by those individuals. But because generally only a small group of individuals design the structures, systems, and processes that we follow today, not all systems, structures, or processes serve people fairly, inclusively, equitably, or justly. And due to eons upon eons of following said structures, systems, and processes, some people inherently have more access or have less access to a benefit or a drawback. And as such, if we continue to design structures and systems and processes with no intentional regard to justice, we are inadvertently continuing to widen the gap between the people served and people unserved. We also want to mention these four kinds of justice and injustice. So there's distributive injustice, which is determining who gets what, apportioning, risks and impacts and benefits. There's procedural injustice and justice, which is processes that determine how fairly people are treated. There's retributive injustice, in which there's punishment for wrongdoing and harm. And there's restorative justice, which is a restoration of relationships through rehabilitation and reconciliation. So energy efficiency as an energy resource is not exempt from any of these forms of injustice. In fact, many of these injustices are present even today within the energy efficiency portfolio and the energy efficiency or energy industry in general. So an example of distributive injustice can be providing an incentive via tax credit relief that requires individuals to have tax liability in order to qualify. Procedural injustice could be the way that a proceeding is governed, like this proceeding, the market rate energy efficiency proceeding. So they must intervene, stakeholders must intervene to have influence. So that requires a significant amount of technical knowledge, time, and funding to review documents, provide comments, participate, and the process itself can be considered unjust because it's not accessible without really those resources. There's retributive injustice, in which programs can eliminate a person's eligibility for the program if the person is past due or behind on a utility program. And then restorative justice is the energy savings assistance programs, which has no cost direct install solutions for energy burdened households. So throughout the incorporation of inclusion, diversity, equity, and justice, both within oneself and a system, the EE space can eventually evolve towards breaking down barriers of exclusion in energy access, program access, and more. So that's kind of the high level overview of justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We always recommend that folks continue learning about these concepts, continue applying them, and there's plenty of resources out there, and we're happy to provide some recommendations as well. That concludes our presentation today. And if you have any questions, feel free to email the facilitation team. Thank you so much.